Hey there. So today is January 2nd. It's the beginning of a new year and I'm getting right to work on my next block project. I'm starting really late in the day, so it's getting dark really fast. It's only 3:15, but it feels more like 5. So I'm just probably going to do the base colors, and that's probably about as far as I'm gonna get on these today. Good afternoon. I really wasn't anticipating a lot of my New Year stuff to take as much of my time as it has, so I haven't painted very much since the other day. So today we're going to be getting started on the actual main event, building up the details and getting into the creative process of these blocks. For this collection, the theme is country cats. I love cats. So it's something that I kind of wish I could say I thought of myself, but my grandmother was actually the one who came up with the concept, and she pitched it to me back in, I think, November, during one of our daily phone chats. She was like, you should do something like country cats, where it's cats in country scenes. And I was like, oh my lord, woman, that's a great idea. Why didn't I ever think of that? So I chose scenes that felt normal, natural, everyday things you might see cats doing on a farm or like a country property, and they're just gonna be chilling, doing their thing, doing what cats do in an aesthetic country scene. I actually had so many ideas for this set of blocks. I decided that just like with my autumn and winter collections, I would do a 6-piece set. I feel like that really is the perfect number, 5 to 6 pieces per set. For this collection, I'm aiming for the color palette to be very warm. When it came to the base colors, I just used the colors pretty much straight. So things like green, brown, black, and white were the main colors that were used for the base, but they're not going to continue to look this way. I wanted to feel warm and like cozy almost, and I wanted to feel comforting, I think. So I'm gonna be doing warm tones, but they're gonna be a little bit on the muted side. They're not gonna be super bold and like vibrant in your face. It doesn't look that way right now. There's like 4 different colors here in all of them, and so it doesn't look like that's where we're going with this. When the weather was too dark and dreary, it made it difficult to get the colors the way that I wanted them, as I couldn't see them properly. So there were many days in January I couldn't paint, as there just wasn't enough proper lighting to do so. The dark weather was really kicking my ass and preventing me from getting these done as soon as I wanted to. It was probably the biggest obstacle to getting this collection completed. Good morning. Good afternoon. On Saturday, I did make a huge amount of progress. This is maybe 90% done, I would say. It's just some tiny details and like shadowing and such that would need to be done, but this one's basically done, so we're setting it aside and moving on. I will do all the extra touch-ups, shadowing, all that stuff later on the final day. Today, we're going to be moving on to block number 2. This one is a barn that has like hay. It's where all the hay storage is, and there's going to be like a cat up here hanging out on this big beam, and there's gonna be a few down here, just cats chilling in a hayloft basically. And I'm quite excited about it. I think it's gonna turn out really nice, or at least I'm hoping that's the case. For block number 2, I started out by painting all the sections of wood different colors of brown and gray to help differentiate them and know when one piece of wood ends and another begins. When I went in to start doing the detail work, I made the colors a bit more uniform, though some pieces are more brown and some are more aged and have a grayish tone to them to give the piece some more variety other than just lots of the same brown tones. Painting wood detailing is one of my favorite things because it's so easy to do and there's very little room for completely messing it up. So although it was a lot of work going in and out with different colors and doing and redoing things until I felt satisfied with how it looked, I really enjoyed the process of getting all the wood details in and seeing it start to look like a realistic hayloft. The hay was a different story. I honestly didn't know exactly how to do it, as I've never actually painted a pile of hay before, so I wasn't sure if my usual technique for grass would work well here or not. I layered on several shades of brown and a golden color, jotted in some of the highlights of hay with a smaller detail brush, and then patted it out with my finger to soften things a little. Sometimes less detail is actually more pleasing to the eye and ends up more realistic looking than painting every tiny blade of grass. You probably wouldn't see it that well in real life, so it's okay to not see it that well in paintings. I then finally took a massive risk and threw in some black for shadowing. Alrighty, so my phone died, so my reference images for the cats is not available, and I tried to keep going a little bit, and it's not going well. So I'm just gonna stop for today. I've been painting for about 5 hours, maybe 4.5 if you remove the few breaks that I've taken to stretch and walk around and just kind of relax my shoulders. But this is how far we got today, which is good. This is so good. I haven't decided what color I'm making the cat up here. I didn't want to make it straight white. It would kind of like pop out a little bit too much. So I might just, well, I might make it a white cat, and then when I do all the shadowing and everything, it'll make it less bright, and then it won't be so like, you know, Where's Waldo but on easy mode. This cat's really massive. I just realized it's very big. I mean, some cats can be very large, but this one's almost comically big. I might have to make him a little bit smaller. And then the kitten that's down here, you can't even barely see him. But once I've added a little bit of highlights in certain areas, he'll be a little bit more noticeable, a little more distinguishable from the background. So I would say this is maybe 80% done. Moving on to block number 3, I started out by working on the background first and then working my way to the forefront, which is my method for all of my work. The background of this one is a lot of greenery, grass, and little flowers and weeds and such, so I took my time with adding those in, but also wasn't worried about it being extremely detailed because that's not the focus of the piece. This block features a cat drinking from a water well with some little ducks chilling in the basin bucket thingy. I didn't get super far with the details of the forefront on this day, only jotting in the major details and base colors for the water pump and the basin that I'm actually going to completely paint over later anyway before I called it a day. Hi! So today is January 14th. So this collection was actually supposed to drop on the 16th, and I'm not even fully halfway through, so that's not happening. It's just the weather has been really kicking my ass, and I didn't take that into account, I don't think, when I planned everything out. Just going through one of those phases where it's like, I don't know if I'm burnt out or something with painting. That might be it, just from doing so many different collections back to back. But it's hard to get myself to start painting. But I think it's a combination of the gloomy weather paired with just feeling a little bit burnt out from all the painting and crafting and creating I did during November and December. Anyway, let's get started. this is how far we got today. Not bad. I'm really struggling with this water pump thing. I don't know what it is about it. Like, I know it's not right. Like, there's like the proportions are off. I don't know if it's too stubby and then it's too narrow, I think. Because everything that's on the top here, I can't seem to fit into the space like the way that it looks in the image. But we're not going for perfection here. I think it's fine as long as it looks like what it's supposed to look like. It doesn't have to be perfect. I used to spend hours and hours and hours when I was younger, like going over something and trying to make it as perfect as possible. And as I've gotten older and I've made so many of these blocks and painted so many things over the years, and I've realized that people can't tell the difference. That's the truth of it. Even if I spend like a whole extra week just on this thing alone to make sure that it's perfect, it's not gonna matter, because if I leave it like this, or if I make it even more perfect and more accurate, people really they're not gonna notice. They're not gonna know any better. I've gotten slowly better at letting go of that perfectionism that I used to have, but it's really hard sometimes. I spent ages doing this cat and painting the same areas of him over and over again until I felt happy with how he looked, which included changing his pose a little bit to make it a little more realistic and make up for the fact that his legs were actually a little too short. I wanted it to seem like he's crouching down a bit instead of standing up straight like in the reference image I was using. With that block basically complete, I set it aside and grabbed block number 4, so it was ready to be worked on the next day. For this one, I really went with a more brown undertone to the greens of the background. This more muted green was much more in line with how I wanted all of the blocks to look, but I sort of failed with that with blocks 1 and 3 that also have a lot of green in them, as they turned out much brighter and more saturated by comparison. It suited those blocks individually just fine, but as a whole collection, I wanted more unity between the pieces, and they sort of stood out in the end, as you'll see in a bit. Not a terrible amount, but definitely didn't match the more muted blocks as much as I would have liked. I had a hell of a time painting this cow. There was something about the details that I just couldn't get looking right, and every time I felt like I was getting somewhere, I'd do something that would accidentally completely change it, and then I'd have to fix it. I got to the point where I had to just let it be and move on. The cat was fun to do, and I was quite proud of knocking it out of the park right away, but after all of this work, my mom informed me that it looked too small and was more like a kitten than a grown cat. In hindsight, this would have been fine, but at the time I had envisioned it as an adult cat, and so I went back in to make it slightly larger. Cats do look small in comparison to cows, and after looking at several pictures of cats and cows together, I was pretty sure it was the right size to begin with, but here we are, spending an extra hour fixing something that probably was fine as it was. It would not be a painting of mine if I didn't waste at least a little time doing something completely unnecessary. Good afternoon. Today we are approaching 3 weeks into this project. These were supposed to be done last week, so that's something, but we're nearing the end because yesterday I didn't film a lot of the ending stuff. It really wasn't that interesting anyway. It was just all of the grass and stuff at the bottom. But I got this one pretty much done. This is about maybe, I would say, 90% done. So it's on the same level as the previous 3 blocks. So today we are starting block number 5. And this one is going to be a little bit different from the rest in that it's going to have a lot of red in it, with all of the other blocks brown and green and gray are probably the dominant colors in them. This one's going to be a little bit different, so it's going to probably stand out amongst the group of them just a little bit. I think for most of the collections I've done, there's always been at least one block that stood out as being very different from the rest, but it will tie in with the 6th block that I haven't gotten to yet. Those will sort of match a little bit better, so it won't feel too out of place like with the Swan Lake block. That one was definitely completely different from the others. So for this block, the concept is an old barn that has potentially been abandoned. It's not explicitly obvious, but there's gonna be like an old red barn that is broken down and worn. There'll be a cat sitting on a ladder here, and then I'm gonna have another one here sitting there just chilling. And there'll be things like milk containers and things of hay and such inside the barn that you kind of get a glimpse of. I know I've mentioned my love of tiny details a few times before, but let me just pop in here a moment to express how much I love painting these old milk containers. I was so proud of how they turned out, and I had to show every member of my family and specifically point them out because they turned out so nice. They lack the same amount of enthusiasm as me, but that's fine. Day 2 of working on this block was just adding in the cats and final details to the piece. I chose for both of these cats to be gray, as I felt that they would stand out against the red barn much better that way. I glanced up while I was painting to see the gray cat that lives in our old horse stable, who looks perpetually pissed off, struggling to make his way through the freshly fallen deep snow. And I took some time to appreciate the fact that I'm not an old barn cat having to trek through snow in the cold. I would be incredibly grumpy all of the time if I were him too. I found doing the faces on these cats as difficult as all the previous blocks and felt just as frustrated with them, but thankfully they did go smoother than block 2's, so that was a relief, and I was able to move on to doing the rest of the details and a lot of the shadowing, so I had less to do later. Because these cats were so tiny and the details were so hard to put in there as a result, one of the cats looks like it doesn't have pupils. To be fair, sometimes cats' eyes reflect and so you can't see their pupils, so I'm deciding that's the case here because I'm worried I'll ruin it if I try to add them in. That brings us back to this failure. I started with the white cat at the top because I haven't done much with it and I figured it would be the easiest to start with. Confident today with my cat painting skills. No. It just keeps getting worse. That'll have to do. The problem with the orange cat was just the fact that the more paint I was adding on to try to fix the face, the more blotchy and textured that small area became, and there gets to a point where it becomes too lumpy to be able to do any small details in there without making an absolute mess. I had to scrape the paint off with my nail at least twice, but there's only so many times that can be done, so I had to leave it like this even if that's not the way I would have wanted it. On the bright side, at least he actually looks like a cat now instead of a fox. As you can see, the rest of the work on this piece was adding in the sunbeams and bringing in some warmth to the piece with the addition of orange and yellow, which was my favorite part of working on this particular one. The final block of the collection has a much darker color palette, but still maintains a lot of the same color schemes as the others to help tie it in with the rest of the collection. The scene of this one is a kitchen window where you can see the farm cat engaging with the hens. Whether this is a positive or negative interaction is left up to the interpretation of the viewer. In my mind, it's more of a positive interaction. The cat is used to the hens and knows they're friends and not food. Because the cat is also a gray-brown tone, like many of the others featured in this collection, it sort of blends into the background. I tried to make sure it stood out just a little bit so it wasn't hard to see, but I also didn't want it to stand out so much that it was too obvious and it's like the first thing that catches your eye. I wanted what's out the window to be a little more subtle, kind of like how in real life you might not notice what's going on out the window right away, but once you do, you can't not notice it as it's now caught your attention. The face is so tiny I can't get it right without messing it up, so I'm gonna leave it for now and come back to it and perfect it later. Once I felt like the outside was done, I moved on to the curtains. These took like an hour all by themselves. I really struggled with getting them to look realistic and spent a lot of time redoing them and changing stuff before I finally liked them enough to move on. Doing the detail work on the counters was some of the most fun I've had while painting this collection. Painting in the bottles and jars and fruit, and bringing the space to life was just so incredibly fun, even if my scraggly detail brush was struggling to keep up. I was sort of flying by the seat of my pants with the items on the counter, so I had to change things quite a bit as I went along to fix perspective and proportion issues as I came across them, change shapes of some of the jars, or make sure I realistically had enough room on the counter to fit everything properly. I normally don't go in with a gray base for things, but I found it helpful to do it this time so I could make sense of roughly what should go where. Day 2 of painting in these details and bringing them to life. I knew this towel didn't look right and I couldn't figure it out on my own, so I actually took pictures of a towel on my own counter from the same angle so I had a reference to work with. I loved doing the little details so much that I'm just gonna let you watch them come together and I'll pop back in again in a bit. Despite the curtain rod and other details, I felt like it wasn't immediately obvious that this was a window, so I contemplated adding in window panels, but I knew that with the way things were placed, they would end up obstructing the view, and that was the whole point of the scene, what you catch happening out the window. Thought it might be helpful to add something to the edges to make it more obvious it's glass before I went in and added shadowing to the piece. I then went back into the previous blocks and added in shadowing to them as well. I also ruined this one in the process because why not? I then painted the edges and signed them front and back to complete them. These blocks took 2 or 3 weeks longer than originally planned, but they are some of my best work in my opinion, and some of my most favorite block paintings I've ever done. I'll definitely be doing another round of these as I have so many ideas for more country cat scenes that I couldn't fit into this collection. And that brings us to the end of another painting collection video. In addition to art-based videos, I also do a lot of journaling and vlog content, so if that's something you're interested in, take a gander at my channel and feel free to sub if you like what you see. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another Paint With Me very soon.